applying it to Americans, that approach is flawed in itself. In that, as we see with Bloomberg's campaign, you can't just throw money at things, any sort of problem.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Yeah, I mean, I kept hearing this discussion online, or I saw it a few times, and I kept hearing it on talk radio, like NPR, and it got parroted on YouTube, and it just seems so surreal. Like, is this really what we're coming back to?
Yeah, and in the process, the whole reason I'm saying it's a flawed approach to the question is because that whole narrative distracts from
what's actually going on.
Right, and he just blew $500 million, and people are arguing about how much it could have been
distributed. Right,
in reality, the discussion should be about campaign finance reform and how this dude just basically blew $500 million, and it didn't. He dropped out of the race. So
yeah,
it's like
he didn't even. I'm not even sure what his policies were.
Right, and in the process, it's like, what people are discussing is the least important aspect of what's actually going on, and that's kind of where I got into a debate with someone on Twitter about the importance of this discussion, and in the process, because they didn't understand what I was trying to say, I think they got irritated with me, but I'm talking about the point of when people are discussing, trying to break down mathematically how much it would be between, let's say, however many households.
Actually, wait.
That framing.
It would be $3.9.
Right. Hold on. Yeah, 128. Yeah, it's $3.9.
Yeah.
So the whole discussion being put out in the first place was framing this as if the answer to him wasting $500 million is to just take it and split it amongst Americans.
That's the whole eat the rich,
right.
Take their money and redistribute it model.
And then what ends up happening is
full anarchy.
When the people who are putting out this message end up using poor math, then they invalidate everything that they say, because then it makes them look stupid, because then they're like, oh, you take this $500 million, you could have given every American $1 million, and clearly that math doesn't work.
Yeah.
And because they made such an egregious math error, that notion that they just put forward just completely gets invalidated.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where, again, it's like that whole process, I saw it unfold, and I'm like, fuck, this is going to turn into
that's the thing.
The discussion about the math error instead of actually Bloomberg just blowing $500 million.
Well, no, that's the thing. It's that everything was, look, all the things that everyone else wanted him to do with his money.
Yeah.
It wasn't about what his policies were. It wasn't about what he intended to do once he had the job.
Yeah.
None of it was about that. It was just about his money. And that was the weird part, is that here's a guy who's willing to self-finance his campaign, and he made the mistake of jumping in really late and not.
I don't know if it was a mistake. I mean, realistically, if we're talking about how to spend money, he just was poor at spending his own money. Joe Biden jumped in late, and now he's one of the front runners.
Yeah.
Joe Biden jumped in way late. So between these two people...
I think that Joe Biden started when you're supposed to, and everyone else was just really early. Everyone else jumped the gun. I don't think Bernie stopped.
But that's when Trump came in.
I don't think Trump stopped. I think Trump's been campaigning the whole time.
I'm talking about in 2016.
Yeah.
Trump originally came in the same time the original people came in, and that's why those people came in this time early, because they were trying to duplicate his shit.
The pundits saying things like his political rallies were essentially extensions of his campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Like even after he'd already been in office for, like,
he never stopped campaigning
that's what I
after he got
mean.
in office. I'm talking about before he got in office.
Yeah, okay.
Before he got in office, he came in campaigning for office the same time the Democrats came in this time. And the only reason they came in this time is because they were trying to duplicate his campaign, down to like shitting on Elizabeth Warren using Pocahontas. And you see
Yeah.
like left-wing people using Pocahontas, like the Bernie bros and shit. And that's
Man,
where it's
I
like,
feel like they shouldn't even go there.
of course not. But that's where I'm saying what ended up happening is we've started to drift so far right that now we have left-wing people using 2016 right-wing tactics because they're out of ideas.
Man, I saw this thread. It was essentially talking about how the Democrats have gained a whole new centrist population, and that these centrists are essentially Republicans who no longer want to be judged for their Republican values or associations. And I feel like this happened once before. There was like some big, like, rats jumping ship moment, and a bunch of Republicans became Democrats. And this happened, I think, within the last 100 years. I feel like this is like something that, I think they called them Dixiecrats or something. But it's really surreal, because what it means to me when I read stuff like that is that what we thought was the Republican Party has truly been taken over by something different. Like that whole ultra-conservative, neoconservative entity that existed back in the 90s they're not as scary as we thought they were.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to find middle ground as moderates and centrists. But these are the same people that, I don't know.
But that's centrist in the context of a left wing that's drifted right.
Yeah,
for
no,
the
that's
last
what I mean.
40 years.
They're helping to pull it right, because
Yeah.
they're identifying as in opposition of these, fundamentally draconian policies, and they're saying, well, we don't want to be part of that, and there aren't really any options. The parties are very similar, and we break down like the kind of policies that they've worked to develop over the last 40, 50 years. They're not very liberal at all.
No.
I think the most liberal thing that I can think of, that's actually seemed to work, was the EPA, and that was Nixon, and that was it's conservation. That's conserve. It's conservatism.
Yeah.
And everything else just seems to be like what do they call it? The tail wagging the dog.
I don't know. Okay, so conservatism has multiple meanings, and I'm not sure the conservation that is associated with conserving wildlife is the same conservative that is associated with the Conservative Party, in that they're talking about preserving and conserving American values, which also are inherently tied with destroying Native American association with land. So I don't think that...
I think that you find there's a significant number of firearms rights activists who actively engage in hunting, and they will tell you all the time how all their fees go towards
but that's bullshit.
Paying
it's a framing that they present to articulate as if the only way to conserve and preserve the wildlife is to allow hunting.
Well,
that's obviously bullshit.
Wildlife management, forest management, wilderness management. This is all circle jerk, and I get that. But there are a lot of people who genuinely believe that what they're doing is good. Whether or not they realize the broader implications of their activities, that's a different question.
Right.
These are people who genuinely believe that they are working to help preserve something.
Right.
And they're doing that through some really kind of
colonizer point of view.
Yeah, it's so I'm glad you mentioned that.
It's 100% colonizer point of view to say, oh, if we come in and can do a safari in your wildlife, we're going to give you money to preserve it and not destroy it, and not just come in and destroy everything. If you let us kill a few of your animals, we won't burn your shit to the ground, is what effectively they're saying.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to as to why that framing of hunters being conservationists is utter bullshit, as if that's the only fucking solution, because they're the ones that have put that framing forward. Obviously, it's better that the hunting goes towards conservation than not, but clearly that's not the only way, because then you have the people that have the counter campaign of shoot photos, not animals, as the like, yeah, if you want to go on a safari, go and take pictures. Don't fucking kill the animals and hang the head on the wall. That's not the way to enjoy nature. Like, the whole thing is the travel narrative has been dictated by people who are the ones that would go and get the elephant tusks and thought it was okay because they wanted to have this imperialist culture where you could go to someone's country, and if they were brown enough, you could fucking, yeah, go on a safari, pay some Sherpas to take you up a mountain, and then a couple of them may die in the process, but you're the one that climbed that mountain. Yeah, a couple of people may die in the process of you trying to hunt for this fucking lion, but you're the one that shot the thing and took home the fucking skin.
Oh yeah,
and it's your accomplishment, even though it's on the back of some fucking local natives who are getting underpaid for your quote unquote safari experience. So it's this whole culture that's being built around looking at Africa as one entire continent on which imperialists can go have a safari. As long as they take some money and put it into African forests, it's okay to go and fucking kill the elephants and the lions. And that's the narrative that they want people to believe.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I read this article last night. It was talking about how the modern missionary, the Christian missionary, is just a front for imperialism and colonialism, neocolonialism, in that it perpetuates the narrative of a destitute African culture that can't get out of the dirt, and that is technologically poor or lacking educational resources or doesn't have infrastructure, when that's just a reflection of ignorance, really. Like, I've seen pictures of Africa. It's a fucking modern place.
Yeah.
Like, the entire continent has modern infrastructure in certain areas, just like the United States. And we can go to the middle of New Mexico or Arizona, and we will find places that are dust-covered hovels of, trailers.
How are 90% of the precious metals and minerals coming out of Africa, but Africa is the poor continent?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. It's the framing of the imperialists, because they want people to believe that the African people at large are backwards and need to be civilized by an outward force, or an imposing force, in that when they try to frame what's happening with China in the same way, it's not the same, because China, even though they're exploiting leases,
those are agreements that people enter into.
Well,
and those are complicated by local, whatchamacallit, corruption.
Well, yeah, there's definitely corruption.
That's a different basket of...
And manufacturer compliance,
yeah.
But they're also doing cultural trades and not cultural imposition, so it's different.
Yeah. Anthony Clark, at Anthony V. Clark 20, I saw this off of Twitter. He says, Centrum takes the focus away from injustice and places it on the behaviors of those protesting it. This is how we get your supporters are rude, the way they call out oppression, instead of oppression is wrong and must end no matter what. Yeah. He says civility is a tool of the oppressor.
Yep.
And
that's exactly right.
And it's interesting that we frame we frame civility as this proper decorum for discourse and behavior, and then we frame it within, we're bringing civilization and we're bringing this way of being, and it's the imposition of colonialism.
Oh, for sure.
Through really surreal economic imperialism. It's like, oh, you can't afford to participate in our economy. Let us show you how. Here, we'll even give you the means to participate, but now you owe us. It's really kind of scary.
Well, even down to the notion of like free speech zones, being the way that they're supposed to, the way you're supposed to protest is in a controlled manner. You're supposed to get a permit and not block traffic and all these things that are supposed to make it a civil
permission
civil protest.
to protest.
Exactly. In the concept of establishing a line of permission to protest, the state has effectively made it so that civil protest is ineffective by design, and forcing people into the civil protest compliance is basically an easy way to diffuse their movement, but also make them think that they're actually still enacting a movement. And this is why social media, in being able to usurp that trap, has made it more difficult for governments and older people to keep control of the younger narrative. And even down to like okay boomer. So this is okay boomer. The narrative has been stolen by actual baby boomers in that the original phrase was used between teenagers, amongst other teenagers, to say like, oh, you did something or said something stupid, okay boomer. And then in the process, older people learned about this usage and then
thought they were the target.
Right. And to a degree, them being boomers, baby boomers specifically being the demographic from which the term is derived, sort of is aimed at them. But in the process, you realize that like there's no real other group demographically that's older that has an easy name. Like, oh, okay, greatest generation wouldn't have worked. So that's kind of where the term okay boomer is meant to imply any old person, because for a teenager, anybody over the age of like 22 is an old person. Like, you and I might as well be baby boomers to fucking high schoolers, you know what I mean? And if we said something stupid, you best believe they drop an okay boomer on us just the same as an actual baby boomer. And in this context, like, baby boomers were so wrapped up in getting offended by the term that they didn't actually understand what the term meant, and now it's like served to prove that they have a problem.
Some guy in his like middle 20s said okay boomer to me, so I don't think it's limited to just teenagers.
Of course
I think
not.
it's just a colloquialism in this point.
Teenagers is where it started, and that's why, again, the colloquialism doesn't actually mean baby. You're like, if you're saying it to somebody, that person doesn't actually think the person they're saying it to is necessarily a baby boomer.
No,
and I don't think boomers actually understand that.
I think boomer is it's like just boomhauer. It's the doof guy. It's the person that just dirt it just says something, amusing and stupid.
Well, I think there's a specific set of characteristics in that boomers are aloof. So yes, in the boomhauer notion, but they're also very quick to punch down on young people, and then in that punching down on young people, they make observations about the young person being upset that is a direct result of some behavior associated with their generation. So, for example, like, when boomers complain about snowflakes and how they, are complaining about not being able to purchase homes from working, and they just need to work harder, the response is like, okay, boomer, because the boomers are the ones that hyperinflated the housing market and also
just didn't stop working and complicated the jobs
They didn't
market.
stop working, and then they didn't understand the inflation associated with the U.S. dollar in the process in between when Nixon pulled the dollar off the fucking gold standard and basically now when the dollar
oil
has
standard.
Yeah, kind of, but even then it's a fiat standard. So like if our dollar is based on the fitness of our economy and our economy's suffering, then our dollar is suffering in a way that then the government has to pretend it's not, and then turn around and be taking out more loans from fucking China and Iran and other countries that we're pretending to have conflict with, to then turn around to have military industrial be another way to try to prop up the economy. So it's all these interwoven things of boomers not understanding the product of them ignoring the government for as long as they did, while simultaneously the government continued manipulating information in a way that the post-McCarthyist baby boomer generation, who was 100% raised in a constant state of fear because of nuclear attacks, didn't understand PTSD because the term and concept didn't exist yet, to then turn around, have a group of young people who are completely immersed in understanding their own emotional nature and structure in relative to everything else, because they have so much access to information that the previous generations didn't have, that now when adults try to lecture younger kids, I'm talking about Generation Z, they have no idea. The Zoomers, they have no idea how to even respond, because the Zoomers are so self-aware, aware of the problems of the world, and historically informed that they can rip apart most adults in like 3 sentences. They can just rip to the core and be like, oh yeah, your fucking generation is the one that inflated all the houses, while the banks are the ones that destroyed the concepts of family and destroyed the nuclear family and all this shit. And then the boomers are like, they just destroyed my whole being. And they can just cry.
If you search for world history tests and make it more complicated, search for history tests with 3rd grade history tests, 5th grade history tests, stuff like that, and see how good you do. Like, a lot of these tests are actually a lot more complex than what I expected when I saw them. I thought I looked at these things and I thought, well, we didn't discuss that stuff till world history in high school, and this is like a elementary school like level sociology.
I mean, you think you didn't, but you just, as an adult, don't remember probably 70 to 90% of the shit you're bombarded with. I'm really glad you said that. So apparently, at one point when I was in high school, I read what was that Thoreau piece about Walden Pond. His I'm not even sure what it was, because I know I read it and I wrote a paper about it, but I don't remember a damn thing about it. I think we all had to read it.
We all read it.
Yeah.
I remember really complex aspects of Animal Farm.
Yep.
And I remember really deep fundamental message of like science fiction. But a lot of that stuff, I don't even remember reading it. I mean, I remember reading it. I
don't remember reading Fahrenheit 451.
Oh, I remember reading that, actually.
I mean, I remember, or like The Great Gatsby. There's like a bunch of stuff.
I know I read that, but I can't remember what it was really about. And I refused to watch that the DiCaprio movie, because in some part of my brain, it's like, wait a second, I know I've read this, but I can't remember what it's about. I need to I gotta figure it out.
You probably don't also remember reading The Count of Monte Cristo to understand that they're basically the same story.
Yeah.
And this is like, because we haven't experienced enough of the world to understand the relevance of those stories, is why when we read them as kids, they don't have any relevance. We don't retain them. But as we get older, we're like,
that Gilgamesh
Count of Monte Cristo, got it.
I remember reading Gilgamesh and thinking, this is like, this is Superman. This is all of the superheroes baked into one.
Yeah.
But I can't remember the Epic of Gilgamesh. I know like bits and pieces of the Odyssey, but I can't put it all together.
But this also gets back to what Homer was afraid of in the notion of the written word being the destruction of the human memory. And this is, a thousands of years old concept of like, once we start writing, our memory is completely fucking shot to shit, because we used to have to memorize everything.
I used to know every phone number of all of my friends and their addresses, their street addresses. I used to be able to tell you, like, the capital of every state and, all their specific informations, like state bird. I used to remember the names of every European nation and their capitals and some of their gross domestic products, like their primary products.
I mean, in 7th grade, we had to memorize every country and the capital of every country in the world and do it on a fucking test as part, like, over the course of a quarter, because it wasn't even semesters. Yeah.
Holy crap.
Of course, closed book. Yeah. I mean, what's the point of
everything is open book or free, notes, open note testing environments, it seems.
I don't know if that's true necessarily.
I don't know what it is for kids, but like what I'm going through right now, it's all open text.
Well, but that's how real life is, because what happens is the closer you get to the real world, the less restrictions you're having placed on you arbitrarily, because those restrictions don't exist in the real world. There's going to be almost no time in the real world where you're working on a job and not able to access some outside information, whether it's like shit you've downloaded and saved in case of an internet outage or the actual internet. So the idea of these tests that happen in classrooms, everybody knows at this point that they don't apply in the real world. Even scientifically, they don't apply in the real world. So that's kind of where, like, you'll have people saying, oh, even C's get degrees, GPA don't matter as long as you don't fail. And to a degree, they're right, but it's only because the people who have designed the education system to be a factory assembly line process have now made it so then people like Lori Loughlin can go in and buy a degree. So making it so that individuals can pay their way to pass the process invalidates everybody else's shit to the point where the GPA doesn't actually matter. So it's not because the GPA doesn't inherently matter. It's because of where we are now with capitalism and education.
By people in HR departments is that the piece of paper just shows that you can commit to some project.
I mean, to a degree,
because in a lot of cases, companies will train people.
But then that's only if you're saying, oh, how does this degree apply in the job market? Well, how does this degree apply if I'm trying to get into higher education? Yeah. Because then you have to have, cases, you have to have a 3.0
that's the
minimum to get into some programs just as part of it. So then it's like, well, yeah, the GPA does matter. So then that's why the people who say that probably haven't gone into higher education to know that, yeah, there's a lot of places where your GPA matters. Do you think fucking NASA checks people's GPA? I think they would.
I don't think they want like a C mathematician.
I don't think that the C mathematician would necessarily get turned away, but I think that they would look at the GPA and probably not take the C GPA before someone else. Because what ends up happening is some people have skills that the system cannot measure. So someone with the C GPA might have gone and built something that's fucking amazing. And then this person is the one that C students then use as the reason as to why the C GPA doesn't matter, even though the C fucking genius is actually just an outlier, because most C students don't go build shit that actually gets used in the real world beyond somebody else's fucking schematics that they're just reproducing.
I feel like,
I mean, there's no judgment on it.
No. When I'm trying to imagine the C genius,
Elon Musk,
who builds something crazy cool. Yeah, it's like
Elon Musk.
They're like so preoccupied with something else, and that's the reason that their grades suffer.
Exactly.
That's the real reason.
Elon Musk is the C genius that everybody wants to allude to as being like the reason why it's okay for people to get C's on their shit. And unfortunately, his example has too much validation as to why the C genius exists for then people to turn around and say, well, I know the C genius exists, but only in these extreme cases, and there's very few actual C geniuses.
Yeah, I feel like we get more David Lettermans than we get Elon Musks.
Right. Yeah.
David Letterman has a scholarship for C students at Ball State. I'm serious. This is one of those things. Yeah. He went there and he wasn't apparently was not the best student.
Yeah.
But he wanted to do something to help encourage people that were, that he related to.
But he also was like working as a bag boy before he went into college. He didn't have a real prospect.
No.
So like, I get where he's coming from in that I don't think he's trying to promote or reward mediocrity so much as trying to help people that have a disposition or are in a place where maybe they're getting C's because they have to work too much. And then because that's what I would see is like...
That's what I mean. Like, there are fewer of the Elon Musk variety of C genius versus David Letterman.
Right, yeah.
Like, that dude's brilliant. So.
Yeah, and I think some people then try to conflate it to say like, oh, this person's a C student because they have to work. But then that person would be very much likely the one to turn around and say they don't want universal basic income, not understanding the connection because their education wasn't good enough to say, oh, if a person has their basic needs met, then it gives them 1,000 times better environment in which to learn things and grow their skill set in a way that will benefit everybody else. Because then it's like, if I had the time and capacity as an individual to not have to think about meeting my basic needs every single day, then I'm in a much better position to start thinking about other people. Just period. But that notion is so lost on people because, not just in multiple generations were raised to say that you're supposed to be rewarded for your effort and I'm not my brother's keeper. So as a group, we don't have a common effort. It's our individual efforts, but hey, yay America, even though we're supposed to be a nation of individuals, even though that concept makes no fucking sense. So there's all these inherent contradictions with the existential framing of a nation of individuals for the sake of preserving a class of people that will convince themselves that it's better to suffer in positions of toil and work for the sake of getting our deserved compensation rather than saying everyone should get a universal basic income from which to start thinking about how we then approach working in society.
I mean, I was trying to think about like what generation of Americans really did do it all for themselves, and it's like pioneers maybe, but they were still basically colonists, and they were colonizing America and killing people, and so at no point can we really. It's all under the shadow of colonization and imperialism. And so it's really difficult for me to think. I mean, is there ever a period of expansion, of human expansion? I mean, how far back do we have to go where human expansion doesn't come at the cost of just killing other humans or
animals? Because this comes,
or
the
this environment or.
This gets into where I think where you're getting at is the original expansion that was associated with agriculture, in that hunting and gathering, if it was done incorrectly, could only be executed by nomads. So then you couldn't have a culture that sustains, or a civilization that sustained only using hunting and gathering, because it would ultimately overhunt the local resources and then die out. So this is where ultimately agrarian societies seem to coincide with the growth of actual civilized societies. But because we're at a point now where we've seemed to disconnect that association, we don't understand that it was the tilling the land and being able to live in harmony with it. So we're living.
I believe they call it cultivation for a reason.
Right.
It's not just raping the land.
It's not slashing and burning for the sake
it's not
of pillaging
the land.
No.
It's cultivation.
Yeah. So
it's
these cultivating, which is also why you have societies like China who have some aspects of that preserved, that have been able to have much longer histories as a quote unquote nation than America, that's like on the verge of a fucking civil war for the last 50 years, because we have shit like Jim Crow that was like enacted by a generation that still exists.
Because the current version of our Constitution is at odds with the origins of our Constitution.
Which is also at odds with itself philosophically, because there's a lie of free rebellion that actually is just imperialism.
Free rebellion, but you got to fill out your permit.
So, well, not even the permit. When we were told America was rebelling against Britain,
England,
they were actually colonizing the Native American population. So when we're framed our American independence war from Britain, they're just brushing the fucking Native destruction under the rug in a way that, because the way they teach it to us as kids, we forget what happened and can't connect it. And then you get these fucking people who are like grown human beings asking how
it all happens in sections, and it's all condensed and modularized.
Yeah, and they don't understand how like slavery would affect black people today. It's those people who are the ones that will then in a lot of cases identify as left wing, but have these really strange views about certain populations and their place in the country because they don't actually understand the colonizer history from the perspective of the colonized. Because once again, if you have, what is it, like something like 66% or like 40% of Americans, I think it's gone down, but now with this fear, it's probably going to go back up. I think it's something like 40% of Americans have never left the country in general, and then it's like 20% have never left their own state. So then you have these people, 1/3, like let's say,
if they have left the country, it's just to Mexico or Canada.
Right. Those people then try to formulate opinions about the rest of the world, never having left their own backyard. And then they think because of the things that they're shown on TV about their views, because they have echo chambers that can now reinforce these things, that their views are valid, and then they don't have to leave to learn anything. So then there's this whole reinforcing. Everyone has the capacity to reinforce their own view of the world, whether it's left wing or right wing. So as left wing continues to drift farther to the right, the people who don't know anything about colonialism are then able to continue to shield themselves from colonialism by like things like Ancient Aliens then being seemingly innocuous, but being a whole nother level of colonialist rewriting of another person's history, being so normalized that we don't even see it as being colonizer like influence.
Well, that's indoctrination is successful at that point.
Yeah.
I think that's not going to help, or that's not going to change. Coronavirus is not going to change that.
No, I mean,
so here's
not at all.
Here's this other thing I was thinking about with all this coronavirus. I was reading this W.H.O. report, and they said that coronavirus is new. It has something like 96% identical to a known coronavirus found in bats, and 86 to 92% identical to coronavirus in pangolin.
Mm-hmm.
And then 5% of people who are diagnosed will require artificial respiration. 15% will require highly concentrated oxygen for a few days. Some people require up to, the recovery time is 3 to 6 weeks on average. And then they also said that if you have direct personal contact with an infected person, the probability of infection is between 1 and 5%.
It's not very high.
No, it's pretty low. What's interesting though is the kind of the population distribution of over age, and then percentage of infected, and then the fatality rates.
Yeah.
And essentially, it's not really affecting anyone.
Anybody over under 60, right?
You have to be in the 50 and up range to break 1%.
Yeah.
And 40 to 49 didn't even break 0.5%. And it's not until you get into the 70s that you're getting close to 10% fatality rate.
Yeah. No, once again,
I don't think this is going anywhere though. This is the same. This is the common cold virus. It's a variation of that, and people who get some super pneumonia from it, and
Well,
there's no vaccine for the common cold.
you know, I saw a framing of it. It has it has almost nothing to do with the actual disease. It has to do with the information channels that existed when other diseases were starting to become known, versus now when we have social media that allows information to spread like a virus, if not quicker.
Much quicker.
So like, you know, I saw a meme about, you know, if people had reacted the same way to AIDS as they did coronavirus, it would have been great. You know, there's this whole element of, there's all these other things that, like, AIDS has a way worse had a way worse mortality rate, but people still didn't want to fucking wear condoms.
Yeah.
And it's like now, you make people scared of coronavirus. Everybody wants to get face masks all of a sudden.
Yeah,
like
face masks. A pack of like 10 were selling for like 50 and up on
so
Amazon.
what happened with Ebola? Are these face masks working against Ebola?
No.
Y'all act like Ebola fucking is just...
went to the store. There was no rubbing alcohol. There was no hand sanitizer. There's no Lysol. They're out of bleach. It was crazy.
Yeah, people are fucking stupid, man.
So there's one confirmed coronavirus case in Indianapolis apparently, and some IU student who was overseas got tested overseas or something like that, and they've got coronavirus.
Yeah.
And so what I think is that, like so many of these things, it's around for a while. It's going to be around for a while.
Well,
it's not
there's
going
probably
anywhere.
cases that have come and gone because they don't have enough capacity to test people,
Yeah.
and they're trying to figure out how to profit off of it before they test anybody.
Yeah. Well, that's like there was like what was it, a $3,000 testing procedure or something initially, because
in America
because it was so new, even though the WHO and the Chinese were sharing all of their data with CDC.
Well, I saw, because of the way that they're trying to handle it in different states, the capacity to test is like so varied. So in California as a state, I think they might have the highest capacity, but they can only test like 7,000 people a day. And then you get to somewhere like Oregon, they can only test fucking 30 people a day, bro.
Oh.
So this is where, to me, I'm like looking at the coronavirus and I'm looking at capitalism, and I'm like, capitalism can't handle this shit in a way that they had the people at the fucking Republican convention or whatever, like happily fucking going around shaking hands and shit. So we have this entire economy built around people touching shit constantly because, God forbid, we have automation. There's a whole generation, multiple generations of people that need a human to fucking prepare their shit. Like, if you talk to them about this, they will argue with you that they want a human to prepare their shit because they don't trust a robot. Now those same people are the ones flipping out about the fucking coronavirus because they didn't want to allow automation, because they wanted poor people to be able to have jobs in which they fucking suffered through blue-collar labor that could have been automated for the sake of people needing to feel like they're above somebody. And that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
And I don't think people want to acknowledge it.
But we have such wonderful machines, and they do exactly what they're told.
Yep. And they can be desanitized between every fucking use and not have it influence the taste of your food. You know? And you know, one thing I'm thinking,
that's true, because there was that whole problem with those, I think they were Olympus endoscopes, where the seals were bad, and they would stick them in people, but they would come out with material that wasn't getting cleaned out, and so they were like building up all this horrible, nasty, like biological mass and spreading horrible infections.
mm-hmm.
And of course they figured it out and solved the problem and came up with better seals and all that stuff, because endoscopic surgery is a very useful tool for certain problems. But yeah,
I'm starting to wonder if weed kills coronavirus, because I'm thinking, of all places for this shit to break out, areas where people are inhaling intoxicants sharing the same vehicle would be like the most likely place for some shit like that to proliferate, but it's not like Colorado or Washington.
Well, Oregon's got a pretty big culture.
I mean, but it doesn't have, like, these areas aren't
That's true.
breaking out. Like, you'd be goddamn sure that if fucking dispensaries had virus cases, Republicans would be on that shit to be like, we need to ban weed again. We need to ban weed again. Weed's causing coronavirus.
Yeah. So yeah, if weed kills coronavirus, hey, some of y'all need to get on this and figure it out, because we don't have the resources to do that kind of testing, but someone should definitely look into that.
I say it only half jokingly,
but I'm kind of half serious.
Exactly, because
like,
this seems like one of the places where of all areas for some sort of fucking viral pandemic,
a vector for transmission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And especially as much traffic as these dispensaries are getting, and as much hand. I'm wondering if there's something about if you have, say this person who smokes weed is getting a constant, because they're constantly putting foreign matter into their lungs to have a heightened immune system over time, whereas some people who smoke end up getting pneumonia because their immune systems don't respond. So there's probably a group of weed smokers who end up getting emphysema because they don't have the same genetic reaction that some weed smokers have. But what I'm saying is, it's very possible that people who've been smoking weed for like 10 or 15 years or some shit have built up some sort of filter in their lungs that now is keeping them from getting as infected at a large rate. But nobody's willing to study shit from this angle because there's so much taboo with like marijuana that they're like, oh, there's no way we can find a positive association with preventing fucking coronavirus because weed is bad for kids. And it's like this ridiculous response that's even preventing.
So before there was like a confirmed like list of symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I read reminded me of what we used to call rabies. And it was the lung condition one experienced the day or two or three or four, sometimes more, after attending a really heavy-duty rave.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it was because it was in a warehouse or some shitty building that had all sorts of fucked up shit covered with tarps that, taped up. Who knows what the fuck was in it. But these were not clean environments. And there were heavy abuse of fog machines and lots of smoking and a lot of smoking.
Yeah.
And at
raves were dirty.
Yeah,
dirty as fuck.
But at one point I thought, I was like, man, did this like come out of like raves? Shit.
I mean, I wouldn't doubt it.
Because that was like a breeding ground for all sorts of colds and transmission of crazy. I remember getting the nastiest fucking like respiratory infections from going to a rave, just being in the wrong environment, like finding the moldy room that nobody cleaned up or something and not realizing it because you can't smell anything, can't breathe. Everyone's breathing heavy. Someone that's in the room, they've got a cold. Another person in the room has a cold. They're all coughing and everyone's breathing deep and sharing that shit.
Yeah. No, those are definitely breeding grounds. So I would not be surprised if some virulent strain of
coronavirus
something came out of raves. And not, well, this is where you get, some people forget the negative shit that people were saying about Africans when Ebola was hot, quote unquote. And we're talking about, people eating monkeys, and it's like the same shit you're hearing about Chinese people now.
But we know that Ebola comes from bats.
But then they say, "Oh, it's because Chinese people eat bats," and then it's like,
but it's the same. The flying golden fox, when they catch them and test them, they don't have.
Well, but I'm saying it's the same racist ass people who were saying this shit about African people eating monkeys and getting Ebola that are now turning around and saying this shit about Chinese people. But we want to act like this racist population in America doesn't exist and they're fucking Russian bots or some shit. And that's kind of where, again, it's like,
No, they're not Russian bots. The Russians, like, no, they are Russian bots, but the bots are all a reflection of their, like, controller. And the controller is a guy named Dmitry or Vladimir or Pietro or Jorge or something like that, who goes into work every day wearing a suit and has really kempt hair, well kempt hair, and glasses. And, good looking dude. He's a nice guy. He's into athletics and shit like that. But that's the model. He's like a Bond level agent under Putin, who's a Bond level villain, and they want to paint Russia as this, like, deep dark nemesis when Russia's economy is not doing so hot.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it can be pretty adequately described as a gas station with a well-armed militia. At this point,
it's the population is less than that of Nigeria and Brazil.
Yeah.
So, but we're also still focused on the Red Scare
and their industrial complex.
I mean, our country is so what's the word? I guess dumb from McCarthyism that we equate the influence of a country with the population of 140 million in Russia with the country with the population of like 1.3 billion in China, as if they're the fucking same, because they're both what we identify as communists when their countries operate completely different in the first place. They don't operate the same at all.
Well, wait. Putin he's prime minister, like, still. Yeah. He's going to be president again, or they've gotten rid of the president.
I mean, he changed the rules.
I know he keeps changing
times.
them. He keeps changing them. I don't really mind. I think it's kind of amusing at this point, but
it's the same shit Erdogan's doing in Turkey.
Well, they got rid of the term limit in China for President Xi Jinping. So,
yeah. I mean, yeah, it's sort of the same in that, but that's almost more like the opposite of what happened with fucking Roosevelt.
Yeah.
In that specific, because it's one thing when you start redefining powers, if you're like the prime minister and there's also a president, and then you say, oh, now the president has more power than the prime minister because I'm now the prime minister, or now I'm the president. That's like a slightly different, and again, it's just to frame it in the context of, like, they make it seem as if these things couldn't even happen in America when they've happened in America.
We have a Senate majority leader and a House majority leader and minority leaders for the respective branch or wings, and that's Parliament. Congress is a type of parliament. They're very similar.
Yeah.
I mean, they have different. They dress slightly differently, like in England, if that's the parliamentary model we want to look at. But there are other variations on the theme, I'm pretty sure. I don't think it's like an exclusively an English governance system.
No, I don't think so. I mean, if anything, like, the Senate is from Greece.
Yeah.
I think the Parliament might even be more French than British, and if I'm remembering correctly, in the origin of its, so it would have been created in France,
migrated,
but instituted in Britain and sustained longer in Britain.
Yeah,
like the first time they instituted democracy in France, it didn't work.
Yeah,
and it was like, what is it, like the tennis court oath or some shit?
They're like on their third constitution, or we're also.
I think we're also on our third.
Yeah.
Because this is what people don't realize about, like, when we think of 1776, that's not the Constitution we're working on. It's the 1789 one. Yeah. Which is where, again, it's like.
Well, the one that most people are aware of, actually, is I think it's like 1784 or 3 or something like that. The one that is right before that, the one that we have now.
Right.
I think that's the one that we actually see on the internet.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think it was even
and then everything
finalized until 89.
Oh,
in the sense of, like, 89 is when the first.
But even then, we don't even see that as it is anymore, because everything's all is amended.
Right.
And like, I have a pocket Constitution of the United States, and you can read through this thing in, like, 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very long. the Constitution isn't actually very long at all.
No. I mean, when you go see it in D.C., it's like
Yeah.
not, it's like on a couple of pages. It's like a couple of, what is it? Not, it's not pages. They're like, what, scrolls? It would be more, not there because they're not folios, but.
I'm not sure. Parchments?
Yeah,
I think they
parchment's
still
probably.
use parchment
Yeah,
back then.
probably parchment's probably better. The more accurate term.
Parchment, like, such a complex. I had to learn about the origins of paper and printing in one of my classes, and it was interesting because like printing and movable block comes from China, but paper comes from like Eastern Europe. And they were using something similar in Egypt, but not really. And it all kind of just, it all comes together, of course, in Europe with Gutenberg, but they were printing things in China like way before Gutenberg.
Right. Yeah.
They had movable block printing. They just didn't have books the way that we know them with a spine collation. They were still using scrolls.
Yeah.
But they were able to print on a width. That's how they were able to have like official documents. So the organization, as an organizational tool, I wish I could find it. When I was just out of high school, I remember reading this research paper, and it was talking about the things that Eastern and Western culture somehow managed to develop almost identically over the course of a couple thousand years, and there are only a few things that Eastern civilizations didn't do, like the impeller or the helix, like a screw shape.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't develop that, but they didn't need to because they'd figured out how to construct things with like dovetail and pegs and steam, and a lot of those buildings are still standing today,
right,
even though they're made of wood.
Yeah, and it's like if you can make a joint without a screw,
yeah,
which one's more advanced?
Exactly. Or they had floating towers.
Yeah.
Several story tall boat things that just there was some advanced engineering going on in the East. Asian aliens.
I promise you, I've seen at least 3 or 4 episodes that describe those structures that you're talking about as if it was aliens.
Oh yeah, because like the flying fortresses that the Chinese had, those couldn't have been just giant box kites.
Right.
They had to have been something else. They had to have some kind of mystic power, and like Shangri-La is clearly like a hotspot for Asian alien mystic power generation or something.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that the Chinese have their own extremely complex mythology that doesn't have to rely on ancient aliens to explain it.
Or in the same way
they've got the Jade Emperor if they really need to fall back on something.
Well, I was going to say in the same way that hot air balloons work, the concept of a fucking flying carpet could have been used with like the same mechanics as a hot air balloon if the carpet's big enough.
Yeah.
And again, it's like it would have been shaped probably the same way as a hot air balloon, but it would have just been a big ass carpet. And over time, it just gets disconnected in that, like, oh, he had a carriage in which he rode with the flame, and people don't connect that it was like the heat that was making it fly.
Well,
and then it's like
if you tell the story right, it sounds like the carriage is on the carpet.
There's probably a carriage on a carpet as well, but there's probably another carpet that was used to carry the heat, which gets lost in translation over time, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
In that's why what would have been actually something that worked in physics,
like Doctor Strange's cloak, it has a mind of its own, and it could be described as a carpet if you didn't know what a cloak was. It's a flying carpet.
I mean,
it's enchanted though.
But I'm saying, like, if you have a hot air balloon, but it's just made out of carpet, over time, because of the loss of translation, people will say it's a flying carpet, when really it was a hot air balloon that was just made out of carpet. But because of the lack of like consistent translation over hundreds of years,
Yeah, sure.
then it becomes a mythical, mysticized concept that now, because we have inaccurate drawings of the description that was inaccurate, then you have people like, oh, it was aliens, instead of being like, what if they had a fucking 2-carpet system where one carpet had a fire and the other carpet was used to carry the heat like a hot air balloon?
Yeah.
And that, as Occam's razor, is not what people in America go to as the answer. Instead, they're like, what about aliens? Because they haven't learned about Occam's razor for some strange reason.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm saying it's like someone who really wants to encounter aliens. I've really, in my life, I've gone ghost hunting. I've gone searching for UFOs in the sense of like going outside and searching fucking the sky and searching bandwidth and trying to find some indication, like SETI fucking fold at home shit. There's all these things that you can do to find, try to find enforcement. But the like pyramids are not it.
Maybe all that supernatural shit doesn't detect on electromagnetic sensors.
And I've thought about that as well, in that if that's the case,
maybe like
then we're talking about something that is not necessarily
maybe you would need
extraterrestrial. Then
maybe you would need
that's interdimensional.
Some kind of maybe like what if it's not even like able to react with like
then we're talking about something else altogether.
Electromechanical. If it can't even turn a fan, if the fan is turning by way of some other unseen force that's not electromagnetic, that's not some variation of the physical laws of our universe, but can somehow interact with all this stuff.
Then we're not talking just about extraterrestrial. That's extra dimensional.
Extra dimensional.
I'm fine.
That's cool. That's super cool. But why do they have to be called ghosts?
Right. Yeah. Well, even in that, so this is where I'm saying I've gone ghost hunting, and my thing is like, if the most interaction I can get with something is like flicking a EMF meter or some shit like that, I'm not impressed. I'm not fucking impressed, man. Like, knock over my drink, fucking punch me in the face, slap me, pinch me, something that's like because like I watch all these ghost shows because I'm like interested in the concept, but over and over the litmus for response from what's supposed to be an extra dimensional being is so fucking low that I'm like, oh, you're saying a ghost can like flick on a light and you're believing that as like an actual extra dimensional being? If it can affect a light, then it can shut down my fucking nervous system. Mm-hmm. Fucking tase me, bro. Come on. Do it. Just, I want a ghost tase. Just do okay, I'm cool with that. But over and over, repeatedly, I'm not getting ghost tased. So that's why I'm like, I'm just saying I want higher standards for these types of things, in that I'm completely open to the concept of ghosts and extraterrestrials and extra dimensional beings. But the litmus at which other people are presenting their quote unquote proof is like way low in such a way that it makes me look like I'm as if I don't think that those things could be possible, just because I'm actually asking for logical like litmus for it. Like if you're an extra dimension or extra solar species that didn't come from our solar system, fucking, you probably don't need combustion shit. So like, don't come to me with this like description of the fucking fire taking off and the cloud of smoke lifting off in the Bible as being an extraterrestrial species, and they're still using combustion. Nah, I'm not buying that. That's if that thing, like, I'm not saying it didn't exist, but that's just some fucking other humans that got fucking combustion before the people in the Middle East, if that shit was real. So that's where I'm saying, as a like possible alternative, let's look at these things. If the ship that's talked about as wheels within wheels in Ezekiel was real, that don't mean it was not from the earth. If anything, it could have been a civilization like that now we call the Illuminati that's had
Listen,
technology
what-
for thousands of years.
What there's like the ancient Indian, India, like Southeast Asia, Indian stories of like faster than light travel and flying ships and
Right.
and like ray beams and like or energy beams, directed energy weapons and nuclear power.
Yep.
Like, and that stuff's actually kind of interesting because where does that stuff even come from? It's
I mean, but this is also a culture that has
That's what I mean,
historically had a lot of great physics observations
Yeah.
and
They have-
philosophical observations.
they
So I
have
think
a-
it's like
they have a really old astronomical observatory with sundials and
we think of our lives as being so restricted by other people's schedules that we forget what it would be like, or can't even fathom what it would be like to have what we would know as eternity in a lifetime and the capacity to think and conceive of things without the imposition of advertisements and constant mental bombardment by shit that has nothing to do with what we were just talking about or thinking.
Yeah.
And this is the existence where people can observe the stars because they don't have light pollution and map the stars because they have the time and come up with fucking constellations because they've learned about all of the cultural stories because they had oral traditions and didn't have the internet where everything's written. So then you don't have to think. You think you don't have to learn it because it's always there and it's always just a Google away. So there's all these things about.
well, we live in a society, a civilization that has come up with a term for somebody who wants to be reclusive and be an artist, and it's not just an artist. There's a whole like a definition of schizoid.
What term is this?
Schizoid. It's like someone who's reclusive and aloof and lacks engagement with other people. But some of these people are highly creative. Sometimes they just want to, they don't want to be around a bunch of distractions.
I mean, hermit
As a hermit, yeah, exactly.
I mean, but that's well, because that's what I'm trying to see. If, like, let me rephrase this. There is a modern condition that is a deception with the appearance of modernity that disconnects us from our natural condition, which by proxy has basically made it so that the human mind has been what we define as modern for probably about at least 200,000 years, but we only see things as modern
The last
in
100 years.
right. And it's a false perception because we associate modern with technology rather than with capacity to understand emotions or existence or all these other things about what actual modernity is.
I thought it was
And we've
determined-
never been modern
I thought it
by
was
some
determined about,
context.
like 20 years ago or so that human intellectual capacity has remained largely unchanged for the last 200 to 200,000 years.
Right, exactly. Which
It's
is
like-
which is why what I'm getting at in the sense of
It's just a matter of exposure to anything.
information ultimately.
yeah.
And this is getting back to the notion of why when we have certain information distribution constructs, they can create the appearance and feeling of modernity when in fact they're constraints that actually not only limit your capacity to learn and think about even the concept of modernity, but it creates manufactured consent, manufactured identity, and manufactured limitation on the capacity to learn, which is then, because of the way that it's built, presented as freedom. So then there's this whole notion of
freedom
like,
comes with this really artificial sense of urgency. It's like it's an incredible like, oh, you got to keep doing all this stuff because you're not doing anything unless you're busy.
there you go. and you've nailed upon exactly the outcome of what that manufactured concept creates within those that are subject to that narrative as defining their national association. In that's why also people rebel against that notion, because the ones that are aware of it understand the false aspect of it and then are compelled to do something about that false narratives influence on their lives, in that it would be something as an example of like reefer madness being a result of that shared narrative, then compelling people to say, oh, we have to protect this identity by excising people who do this thing. Or at certain points it was like, oh, it was gay people, or at the time the gay people were happy, so it was like the ones that had the demons.
The demons.
Because just remember, gay used to mean happy in America.
Oh, that's right.
Gay was actually a mental illness
at
up
one
until
point. People had demons in their
69.
blood, and doctors would determine that people had demons in their
Yeah.
blood. They needed to have their blood let, and so they would drain their blood or put leeches on them or something, right? Something like that. I think it was just blood draining.
So this is one period in our history as Americans where our narrative is it's presenting
There was a
our
time.
construct.
There was a time when doctors were just traveling salesmen who would give people elixirs, which amounted to like booze and opium and cocaine.
Yeah.
and sometimes marijuana.
Yep. And that was a period in which that construct as the narrative made it so that the milkman as the potential father of a bastard kid is a punchline of a joke.
Postman.
Or the doctor, or whatever.
doctor.
That whole period, there's all these things around that, the way things were in that period, that then present the culture and framework as to how we approach that period. And that not just that period, we approach culture as well with the understanding of that influence. And this is kind of why it's like, I've been thinking about ethics in that when we look at the past, you often hear people say, oh, we can't hold people accountable in the past with the same ethical standard as we do today. When in fact, that's the exact reason we have ethical evolution, to understand what was wrong in the past, and not to just absolve your fucking granddad of being racist because he happens to be your granddad. And this is where we get these people who want to be revolutionaries, but then on Thanksgiving dinner don't want to challenge a fucking racist granddad about his views because of for the sake of the family. So there's this whole notion of like, people want to take the easy routes and easy battles and leave the difficult ones unfought. And in fact, it's those difficult ones that are the ones that actually enact the change, because it's like, if all these people who are quote unquote Bernie Sanders supporters had like challenged their fucking racist grandparents at any Thanksgiving dinner before, we wouldn't be here today. Straight up.
Apparently, young voters, like people under 30, didn't turn out to any of the primaries.
That's because they're the same ones out here being like, okay, boomer, and telling their grandparents to fuck off with their inheritance because they don't want to take their money if it comes with like emotional abuse. So that's where it's like, I applaud these young people who are like not scared into thinking voting is the only way to affect change, when in fact this gets back to the whole notion of manufactured consent being like, oh, the only way to impact change is voting, and then when you have your vote overturned by the DNC or the Electoral College, your vote doesn't actually fucking influence anything.
But before you vote, you have to go fill out your permit application.
Exactly. Exactly. You have to go register, motherfucker, or else you can't just show up and vote. Even if you can prove on voting day that you're American, you can't just show up and vote.
I think you can still request a provisional ballot.
But you still have to request it. That's still registering, or that's still request it, getting permission.
And then, you still have to get permission to do it. So
again,
you still have to get permission to vote.
As an American citizen, you have to get fucking permission to vote, even if you've never been to jail, even if you're a natural birth citizen. You have to get fucking permission in a way that when you think about it like that, it's like, oh, let me raise my hand to ask to go to the bathroom. That's that fucking juvenile, infantilizing shit that the boomers want to do to everyone younger than them, to make them feel as if there's no way that you can influence anything because you're still a fucking kid, even though you're almost 40. Because you still have to get fucking permission to influence government. But if you don't go get that influence permission, you better not complain if you don't vote.
What?
You better not complain about social problems if you don't vote, because it's the only way you
I
can
wonder why
impact social
millennials were given
problems.
such a strange name instead of just having some generation, whatever. Was Generation Y not good enough?
That's what I'm saying. I said the only reason we have millennials is because boomers forgot they already named us Generation Y.
So wait, is there an opportunity that they may have confused Generation Z
I think-
with Generation Y?
And you know why? Because we've aged so well, because we don't carry the stress of capitalism that they can't tell us apart. So they call anything below like
Some
what they
threshold?
think is like 50 a millennial, because they can't tell us apart.
But under 50 also includes Gen X.
Right. They can't tell any of us apart. Gen X aged well too because they were all about fucking music and fucking. That's what Gen X was like, the modern day hippie, but also they had like Tupac and Nirvana. So you got this weird emotional, like, listens to 90s rap group that is not afraid of crying in public, but also understands thug passion and shit like that. Where you're like, it's this super weird demographic that is like, yeah, fuck the police, but also like, hug me if you have a problem. Like, it's a very, very odd group, which is also why they can't tell us apart. This Gen X is the one that gave us Plur.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't come up with Plur. Gen X gave us Plur.
That's true.
They were like, hey, you kids, be nice to each other.
Yeah.
And we started raving. We were like, okay, Gen X. And then we all, like, started to look alike, and now old people can't tell us apart is what happened.
Shit.
And that's ultimately why boomers will call us fucking millennials, because they just can't tell, like, oh, this person doesn't have bags under their eyes from having a boss that they can't talk back to
And the
for
Zoomers.
10 years.
And then there's the Zoomers. and they're all approaching there's some of them are able to buy booze. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you got to think about, like,
That's an adult in this country, right? If they can buy porn and booze and cigarettes,
course.
they're adults now.
but the older people always want to infantilize the
Holy
younger
crap,
people.
what comes after the Zoomers? Are we
I don't
onto the
even
number
know.
sequence now?
I don't even know.
Shit.
Well, because then I was looking at, like, dude, you seen TikTok, right?
Yeah.
The way people are using TikTok, everybody's doing jump cuts and editing like Michael Bay. But that's just fucking what young kids can do now. Young kids can edit video in a way that in 1999 would have been revolutionary.
Anyone born
That's just
after
what-
2010 is called Generation Alpha.
That's because they're so informed that they can look at older people and just cut through them and, like, fucking destroy old people with, like, 2 words. They could just be like, oh, okay, boomer. And then it's like, inside, older people get destroyed. This is like the generation we're dealing with, in that you have people who don't want to acknowledge that it's the most informed, fucking boldest, willing to step up and tell old people to shut the fuck up generation that pisses old people off, because they're the ones that created this shit.
They are unencumbered by decades of indoctrination.
Yeah.
And so their minds are still limber enough to conceptualize things that our brightest minds can only think of once they've seen the math or can only see it once the math is presented. And they are able to, communicate these things in a way that is going to be meaningful.
Yeah.
We just don't know how to, it's like each generation makes its own language at some point, or its own music, or develops its own culture. And that's just the nature of things. I think it's like with music, I've maintained that you're not old until you, as long as you can hear the music through the noise.
Right.
And because I remember hearing people say things like "turn that noise down," like when I was a teenager, just someone's house, you hear someone turn that noise down.
Well, we were one of the first generations where
the music wasn't made with normal instruments.
Right, and we had subwoofers and shit in our high school vehicles. Like, just imagine 1955 with people rolling around with subwoofers. It would have been a completely, like, the music would have been different, but just even the concept, things were so different when we were rolling around with fucking raves in our trunk, and everybody has the capacity, like, not everybody, but everybody at a certain point, if you're, well, the economy was better then too. So, like, a lot of people could just go work at Best Buy and fucking
load their car up with stuff.
Yeah, be like balling because the economy is in such a place where our imports from China are allowing us to go buy subwoofers at a rate in tandem with our pay rate from Best Buy that this is like the best time in America. I'd argue that the late 80s, early 90s will then be economically seen as the best time in America, like even above what is deemed as the greatest generation by future historians.
I remember in the 2000s, I remember someone telling me that economic growth under Clinton's administration was unseen.
Right.
Like it was people thought it was good with Reagan. They didn't realize how good they had it with the Clinton administration's work or whatever that's how they framed it.
We need to stop like the notion that a president has anything to do with the economy.
Well,
they don't.
No, they don't.
They don't. And this is like fundamentally
they can just like impose taxes.
They can't.
That's what those tariffs are. They're taxing the population.
But they have to get past Congress.
Well,
so they can't do this shit unilaterally. So that's why I'm saying, like, the president can't influence the economy on their own, even in the sense of, like, yeah, they can pass executive orders, but Congress can overturn it. So if a president passes an executive order and the Congress doesn't overturn it, that's not just the president acting. That's Congress being complicit. So it's actually two parties. It's always at least two parties. And this is the beauty of the checks and balances. Not to, like, go on a huge rant, but what ends up happening is then because of party politics, we want to get in this notion of like, oh, the economy's doing bad because of Trump, but the economy's doing good because of Obama, when in fact they don't have anything to do with shit. The economy
is the result of like decades of forces moving together that are all trying to, you know,
sometimes and sometimes it's the impact of some shit that happened yesterday, like coronavirus. Didn't start 10 years ago necessarily.
Or a big-ass storm in a shipping lane.
Exactly. So it's not like, just... It requires, it's a confluence of an immeasurable number of factors.
But then there's always the weather or a virus that we can't account for.
There's the notion of patterns that humans want to see in things that don't actually exist in the real world is what I'm getting at.
Computer.
And the economy, exactly, the economy gives the appearance that there is some sort of pattern that represents the confluence of speculation and real world events. And people are taught this framework, whether it's Keynesian or Chicago economics, that the economy represents that, when in fact it actually has nothing to do with it, but only because humans want to see patterns that we believe that shit has any sort of relevance. And not to say that it doesn't have any, it's just that it doesn't have the actual relevance that we want to attribute to it because there's too many variables to actually measure to say, oh, the storm is the reason the cost of toilet paper went up. Like, you can't actually do that because there may be a surplus of toilet paper, but it's like one person buying up all the toilet paper that caused the shit to go up and not actually the storm.
Yeah.
So there's all these things that happen where you're like, it would be great if we can just fucking just identify everything by new numbers and get a formula for the entire fucking universe which is a goal of unified theory. But it doesn't happen that way. But the problem is because we have schools of thought that necessitate belief in their systems to a certain degree that doesn't even necessitate 100, like no school of thought will say it applies 100%, but then you get that disconnect with what the school of thought says and how it's presented to lay people, and then say, oh, academia says shit is supposed to be, it's either all global warming or not, when that's not what scientists are saying, because there's a disconnect between what's being presented and how it's being.
But global warming is a complex. That's a complex thing to discuss, though. Climate change itself is really complicated. It's just a complicated subject. I think that's part of the problem, is that you can't condense it into something really, really easy. It's never going to be. It's never going to be an easy discussion.
Well, but
because
then
there's you got to start observing historical atmospheric trends over hundreds of millions of years to really see the patterns of the things that we attribute to patterns,
right, exactly.
But we can't really see a pattern, because on a geological level, that kind of thing only happens like once or twice, and it's not on a cycle.
Yep.
There's no record or way to create a model that shows, oh yeah, if we've got even with the whole, like, we've got an extra, or we're orbiting a small orange-sized black hole, and that has its own profound gravitational effect on everything. Even that doesn't come into play when we're talking about increased levels of carbon in the atmosphere over time, over millions of years. And so it's like, but the thing is, we know that increasing the carbon level does certain things. It's still complicated.
But here's the thing: we don't know if it's increasing the carbon level that does it, but we know something is happening. Yet there's a group of people that will then try to articulate that, because just as you said, we can't know
the carbon level.
We can't know why unless we have millions of years worth of records. Then we can't know at all.
Yeah.
So then they'll try to use your own logic to invalidate what you just said.
Oh no, but by my own logic, we've created. But they know from the amount of atmospheric carbon that we have gone well in excess of the carbon levels at the beginning of the end.
Dude, but I'm saying what I'm expressing is the dumbass skeptics who don't understand how information works would have heard what you said and then try to turn it against you and say, but we don't have records that go back millions of years, so how can we know? So it's like, because science itself asserts that we can't find the proper cycles without having millions of years of records, and we infer based on the 26,000 that we have.
Yeah, that it's just a spike.
That then the layperson who doesn't understand what you just said extrapolates your literal words and then says, but I thought you said we need millions of years worth of records. Yeah. And then it becomes this circular logic of trying to explain to that person why what you just said doesn't invalidate the 26,000 years of records. But they don't have the capacity to think in such an abstract manner to actually understand it, or they don't want to understand it, because it's like...
We can do like lead, I think it's lead plutonium dating. It's like more complex than radiocarbon dating. Mm-hmm. And it's good for like, I think like 5 or 6 billion years of accuracy.
But that's
enough for our planet.
But that only shows like existence. That doesn't show anything about intent. What I'm saying is like the impact of humans on the planet is the like goal of what they're trying to show as the global or climate change research. But then because we only have records that go back a certain date with human existence, like that group tries to say that our lack of records that goes beyond that invalidates the 5 million years because it doesn't show how humans were moving or working within. Because that's what I'm saying. It's like we can test and
I feel
see.
like at that point it's the framework that's wrong.
It is, and that's what I'm saying is like
It's
there's
maybe these people just need to see a better chart, or
I don't
better
think
graph or
that'll do
something.
it. And this gets back to the whole old dog new trick thing where.
I think those infographics are pretty good though.
But it doesn't matter how good the infographic is if somebody doesn't want to change their mind.
Oh yeah.
And this is what I'm getting at in the sense of this entire. It's the same group
Infographics for old dogs
who don't
want to
call
change their mind.
Asian people, or who don't want to stop calling Asian people Orientals, because they don't want to accept that Oriental is meant for non-human objects, like because they don't want to learn.
Oriental rug.
It's the same people that don't want to call transgender people by their proper gender, because there's only 2 genders. So like. I have a fucking statistics teacher that's using gender as an example, and he'll constantly say shit about there only being 2 genders, and then I'm like in my head, like, is this dude trying to make it a political argument? And then he'll say something like, after like framing it, oh, there's only 2 genders, like, don't make a snarky response to what I just said. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's just totally being an old dude making this political in the context, in that there's this demographic that actively doesn't want to learn new things, and because they're old. And there's this idea of like, once you reach a certain age, you don't have to change your viewpoint because you've earned the right to have this viewpoint as an American.
I hope I become that old someday.
So old you stop respecting other people's fucking self perceptions of self, because again, that's where it's like it's the same people who don't want to call someone by their proper gender because they see long hair or they see a big chin or something, so I'm gonna call you a man. You used to be a man, I'm gonna call you a man.
Oh wait,
it's so fucked up, man. They just don't want to respect other people is what it comes down to.
Yeah, but it seems like such a clown, like a caricature of. I know it's real because I've got an uncle who said some dumb shit around me like that, just completely insensitive things, and so I know that it's real, but it's just one of those. It's like, God, where have we as a society failed these people? How have we has it not been made clear enough at this point?
Well, I think what it comes down to is these people used to be able to bully their way around into dominating culture, and we still kind of live in a bully culture, but day by day it's decreasing in its capacity to exist because we're seeing the results of bully culture every day. It's impossible not to see the results of it. Whereas before, when people were bullying others, they didn't have to see them crying on the internet, a day later. And whatever the result is, they could just run away from it in a way that in movies, bullying is so common as part of the narrative in the early 80s.
It was a mechanism to drive the story's development.
Yeah, like think about Weird Science. The older brother as a bully, that's not the main storyline. He's just a bully, and that's part of his character.
Chet.
Yeah.
Chet.
And he eventually comes around, but it's because
they
had
him into a blob.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's all this shit, and then there's so much wrong with that movie. Now that you look at it, you're like, oh my God, we've come a long way ethically. Just that movie, like 16 Candles, fucking Breakfast Club.
Oh yeah.
Just look at any movie, fucking Goonies.
Long Duck Dong.
Like Goonies was like a PG movie, wasn't it?
I think so.
I think Goonies was a PG movie. They're making fun of mentally handicapped people. They're making bullying just seem normal. Fucking child kidnapping and abuse.
Yeah, PG.
That shit is just PG movie. Kids got kidnapped and fucking tied up, held hostage. That shit was just PG. 1985, kidnapping kids. Parental guidance suggested.
It's called a romance adventure.
Let's make fun of Asian kids. Let's make this whole entire stereotype about an Asian kid. PG-13, or not even PG-13, just PG, because I don't think PG-13 existed yet. And that's where I'm like, we've come so far, and we have far to go. But then the people who made Goonies are still alive and are like cowering in the corner because they like, you can't hold me accountable for what I did fucking 30 years ago, even though I was a grown man. And it's like, yeah, we kind of can. And I think it's hard for people to just accept like, hey, you don't age out of responsibility for your actions ultimately. Is what it comes down to. Like, if you did some shit when you're 13 that you still haven't apologized for or made up for, you didn't age out of responsibility for it. Like, I broke a fucking church's window when I was in like 5th grade or something. Yeah, I did that shit. I didn't. Okay. I was testing God when I did that shit, but that doesn't change the fact that I did it. And it's like, yeah, fucking 20-something years later, I still am responsible for that shit I did as a kid, and I still remember it. And I can't necessarily be held accountable for it now legally, but can I be held accountable for it ethically? Of course. Yeah, I shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't have fucking done it. It was dumb. It was wrong. It was immoral. I can't change that, but that doesn't mean I can't hold myself accountable for the past. And
I've seen people asking how to be better people. Mm-hmm. How do they make amends for like past expressions of racism? Mm-hmm. This is like a trend on the internet. I've seen this like with in different places, like on not just Facebook, like when you start like hanging out at a media outlets comments section, sometimes you see people actually making these really profound statements, and it's kind of surreal. Mm-hmm. It's all on the whatever discus
and people want to do everything but actually make amends.
Yeah, they ask, how do I do this?
Like, just fucking say sorry, motherfucker. Whoever you wrong, just say sorry. It's that easy. Motherfuckers be like, oh, should I run across America and fucking raise money for the homeless? No, that stuff is cool, but just go say sorry. It's that easy. But people want to overcomplicate shit in a way where you're like, holy shit, man. Instead of just going and saying sorry, this person made a whole entire post. How do I make amends? Fucking say sorry.
How do I make amends?
As if some person didn't tell them when they wronged somebody as a kid, you tell your brother sorry. You tell this person sorry. And you have to mean it. You have to fucking, I'm sorry you got offended. I'm sorry what I said hurt your feelings. That's not an apology.
Yeah.
When you try to understand why you wronged somebody and why what you said made them hurt, like why you made them hurt, and then you actually feel bad for doing that, that's how you make amends. And it's crazy as if like somehow that's some super complex shit.
Yeah, why does communication have to be so complicated?
Why does it... And this gets back to boomers who had...
I understand why... I understand that it's complicated to build a cell phone and develop the network to allow...
Let me ask you
to
something.
Facilitate communication, but...
Let me ask you something. You have mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
They're still alive, right?
I talk to them almost every day.
Have they ever told you that I love you?
Sure. Probably. I think so.
Guess what? There's a whole entire generation of people who've never had that happen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in America. They're called baby boomers. Some of them may have had their parents say, I love you. But for the most part, the greatest generation was incapable of expressing emotions toward even their own families. So like my grandma, like I would say I love you, and it was like only the last couple of years where she would like say it back. It was like a deer in headlights. She didn't know what to fucking say, because it's like that generation was not trained to express themselves emotionally. Number one, because when they were growing up, kids were still fucking chattel, so they actually got to learn, or they got to see ethics start to actually look at kids as human beings, but they were the kids that still weren't looked at as human beings. So anybody who was born before like 1920, which is a lot of our grandparents, were like sent to work in coal mines and shit when they were kids, or like doing shit that adults do now, because they weren't actual human beings until you hit like a certain age. Because if you like, because of the mortality rates, yeah, that was like early 1900s, like late 1800s, early 1900s. It wasn't that long ago. So because kids would die so frequently, like until you reached a certain age, they didn't really look at you as like a person. You're like, oh, this is just a kid who's working in the family, working in the field, whatever. Yeah, they're a part of our family, but they might die. So we're going to have another one just in case, because we need fucking somebody to work the farm. And that's how people used to look at kids in general. That was like normal. We see, like me saying that shit sounds horrible right now, but that was just how fucking our grandparents existed.
Looks like it started in 1923, but it wasn't fully realized until the 30s.
There you go. So it was even more recent.
1938.
So like my grandparents were born in like, I think like 1914 or something like that. Well,
Yeah.
shit.
It was
Yeah.
1938 labor laws placed limits on many forms of child labor. Agriculture was excluded.
Yeah, of course it was. So, you know, this is the type of shit that they don't teach you in a lot of public schools. So then you can turn around when you get out of high school and be anti-union because you never learned about how unions stopped fucking child labor. Because this is something I always look at my educators and the things that they fought to teach me. I'm like, holy shit, I'm so glad I had the educators I did, because then I understand why the people who hate on unions and hate on like labor protection in America, but also are blue collar fucking poor people, are the way they are, because they aren't taught why their kids are protected from working. And they don't understand that, yeah, a child, if you have a kid right now, it don't matter how old as long as that kid is walking, you would have had to put that kid to work because you'd be so fucking broke, and the laws would have been okay with you doing that. That right now, if we didn't have the fucking labor laws that OSHA helped implement, like, America would be such a different place. You can't even fathom it. Like, this is some shit that we could make a TV show about, and people would be like, oh my God, what is this dystopia? It's fucking 1915 America. Yeah, there's kids working in fucking coal mines and shit. But now we have labor protections that prevent it. And then you have right-wing working class people trying to dismantle those labor protections because they didn't learn about this shit. And this gets, you know, this is the colonizer history and education.
So they want to undo child labor laws so their kids can work more? I don't understand.
Other people's kids,
So
because
other
they're
people's
not
kids
thinking
work more?
about their kids in this
But
shit.
why do other people's kids need to work more?
So you can have your fucking cell phone and your Nikes.
Oh, yeah.
And the shit that people realized other people's kids were actually doing in the 90s that was just being hidden by major corporations. But now that we have the internet, we can't fucking hide that shit anymore.
But now you can be a YouTube star.
Right. I mean, well, you know, this gets like, have you read Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death?
I don't think no.
So I haven't finished it because it's so information dense. I've been reading it over like a couple years, man. I try to digest dense information as it's meant to be digested, not try to rush through it just for the sake. Oh, I read this book. Like, no, I've taken a long time to read it because, like, you read the first page, you're like, oh my God, this dude wrote this shit in like, what, 85? What the fuck? Okay. Okay, you have my attention, sir.
Yeah.
And then he's like breaking down society that hasn't even happened yet in a way where you're like, fuck me, man.
Well,
like, how predictable have we become that this dude saw this shit coming?
Our society hasn't changed much in the
Right.
last 50
No, the tech has
60,
changed,
100
but our
years.
society hasn't changed in 200,000 years.
Yeah.
Barely. We're still telling the same goddamn fucking Romeo and Juliet story. Fucking
I think
14.
I think I'd like to think
Because there was like,
I'd like to think that that cynicism at least has improved.
Diogenes. Diogenes is the motherfucking cynic of all time, bro. Diogenes the dog will like say some shit that when you're like, when the fuck was this dude born? Like, what era in Greece did he live? And he was like talking shit to Alexander the Great in a way where you're like, oh my God, he burnt this motherfucker. Like, really? But that's where I'm saying, like, cynicism is fucking cynicism, whether you're a caveman or a goddamn, living in the future with flying cars. Because you're like, man, fucking Oogie went out and bashed another woman today and just dragged her back to the cave. What the fuck is up with Oogie? And you're like, the caveman cynic has complaints too.
Yeah.
Like, there's some shit where you're like, there are ubiquitous emotions and concepts within human existence that it don't matter what technology it is. And this gets back to why we've never been modern, because we delude ourselves with the technology actually disconnecting us from these biological behaviors that are so innate in our behavior that they haven't fucking changed for 200,000 years.
Well, the description has. We can call them first world problems.
Right. Right.
I don't think that
Babylon, Roman problems, same shit, man. Caligula, fucking Gilgamesh problems. Gilgamesh got bored of being a king too.
biblical proportions, biblical problems.
Yeah, that's a funny term. The notion of when we look at the Bible, there were estimated 300 million people on the earth. So when we talk about the term biblical proportions in the context of 7.5 billion people, that's a reduction in scale. That's so it's so crazy that like the parlance that we have is so outdated.
Were there even that many people?
Well, that's estimate. They wouldn't have been. We can't know because they didn't have records. Well, this gets back to when they're discovering
I'm pretty sure the population explosion happened within the last 1,000 years. Not even 2,000
Well,
years.
but this is before they made these estimates before they rediscovered sites that show major cities. I think the estimates in some of the South American sites are they go as low as 300,000 up to 3 to 5 million in some of these cities that they could support up to 3 to 5 million. So this is where, again, if there's a native population, 4,000 years ago that had one city that's 3 to 5 million, that's not the only one. Yeah. And it's just a matter of the earth swallowing the proof up in a way where we didn't have the capacity to learn about them, which then had these dumbasses thinking the earth is 6,000 years old for a little bit.
I still think that any kind of giant mineable space or area, anything that gets strip mined used to be a city.
I mean, that's very likely. And again, that's, that framework hasn't really been accepted in a way to truly understand the implications of what that means if there was a concentration of a city that's so old that it actually just reverted back to the fucking minerals. And you're like, whoa, that's possible. That's totally possible. If this place is 4.6 billion years old, this planet is that old, then that is 100% possible.
Well, I don't think
that shit is 100% possible.
I'm pretty sure it only takes 20,000 years.
Exactly. I mean, the tar pits.
Yeah.
For the tar pits are a perfect example.
I think the Earth can reclaim materials a lot faster than we want to give it credit for.
Yeah.
Once it's consumed,
Even down to like, what are the estimates for these nuclear sites? Is like 100,000 years. We're talking about it as if that's actually.
Oh no, they're 50,000 years.
Yeah, it's not even that long relative to the Earth's life. But
So
we're
really-
looking at it relative to our
I
lives.
mean, realistically, once they contain the radioactive site, like the radiation around the area starts to dissipate.
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of cleaning the area of radioactive material,
Yeah.
and that's actually easy.
Which the Earth does at some point too.
Yeah, the
like
Earth-
it'll
the
do
Earth
it
will do that
over
on its own.
at some point, if it's thousands and thousands of years or not.
Unless it's like plutonium, then it takes like billions of years.
Well,
But that's cool.
yeah.
It'll just
I mean, how
swallow
did
it
it get
up.
there in the first place?
It'll just swallow it up, and then it'll get reabsorbed
I
and
mean,
redistributed through the.
It's not on the surface now.
Yeah, as long as you're not handling it, it doesn't kill you.
And that's again, you know,
And it actually has to be heavily refined too. It's not like you can just go like dig up like raw plutonium.
right, exactly.
You
Yep.
gotta extract it and then refine it, and then
Yellow cake.
yeah, you might mistake it for sulfur or potassium.
Yeah, man. No, this is a great time to be alive for so many reasons, but also people get so wrapped up in the negative that they forget how positive shit has become. And I think that's kind of where, again, like, you know, the only reason young people even came up with the term okay boomer in a way is because you have older people punching down, like Greta Thunberg. No person that calls themselves a quote unquote man should have ever been making fun of a child, let alone like this person who's trying to change the planet. I don't give a fuck what you think about global warming or climate change. This kid, and the same with the fucking Republican kid that, you know, became the subject of all that harassment with the Native American dude that was a phony. Like, anytime there's a kid in the public eye, nobody should be punching down on them as an adult. Let the kids do that shit, because they're gonna do it anyway. And we don't want kids fucking making fun of other people. But when you have adults making fun of a fucking teenager, what the fuck do you think the teenagers are gonna do? So I think this is a case where it's like, we can't tell kids to
I
stop
think
making fun of
teenagers were
people.
making fun of people long before Greta
Maybe.
Thunberg.
I mean, of course, but I'm saying there
I'm
may
pretty
have
sure
been a
teenagers
point.
have been making fun of things for as long as
I-
teenagers
I-
have been a concept.
Maybe, but you go to other places and bully culture is not everywhere
Yeah.
outside of America. America is a very specific type of bully culture that enables the kids to do it and perpetuates it among the adults that doesn't exist in the rest of the world everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, like, this gets back to the notion of 40% of Americans never leaving the fucking country, to realize that, like, everybody's not subject to Biff Tannen and the bully being like a thing. You don't have to have a boss that's a bully. You don't have to have a fucking coach that's a bully. If you have an authority, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be a bully. But because we were raised with the media, with the big brother, the fucking teacher, whatever it was, the bully was just part of the culture. So we were raised to accept it. And now kids are fighting back against that shit. And the bully, like, the older people that didn't fight back against that shit now are mad. And that's what I'm calling that shit, is like all the people who are like baby boomers and older who want to get mad at younger people for saying okay boomer in response to like not acting on climate change, not acting on racism, not acting on ever having a fucking woman president, not even having the DNC put forth a fucking woman as the candidate in the national or the general election. Y'all gonna blame that shit on the kids? Okay, boomer, is their response, because they're not fucking taking it anymore. And I say, bravo to those fucking kids, because that's what I'm saying. Like, we have a generation who's not fucking taking bully culture anymore. And their response, they're not beating these people up. They're saying, okay, boomer. They took the fucking boomers game and fucking beat them at it. And that's why the boomers are mad. They took their little snowflake. Okay, snowflake. Okay, boomer. That's exactly what that shit is. They just beat the fucking boomers at their own shit, man. They wanted to distance their own grandkids emotionally and talk shit about other people's grandkids as if they're not talking about shit about their own grandkids in the process.
Well,
Okay, boomer.
I'm not sure what anyone hopes to accomplish when a generation says we're concerned about the environment, but people in power don't listen, or when we say a generation says we don't like the state of race relations, and we think that there's a way to resolve this, and it's just they give lip service, and so at some point they're not listening.
Yep, that's exactly what it comes down to.
And if they're not listening, then eventually the people who have complaints stop complaining, because the people who are supposed to be listening don't care.
Yep.
So I don't know. I'm pretty sure that there's been some like long-term push from like evangelical America to just keep on keeping on, and eventually their population will increase to a point where they reach critical mass and can vote their way into power.
Yeah.
And that's like,
except they can't procreate, right?
Yeah. Well, they just got to dumb it down.
Whoops. They wanted to have missionary only, and now they're having fertility problems. Whoops. Should have allowed some variation in the bedroom, Christian church. Sorry. Now y'all losing the vote because you can't repopulate fast enough. And that's real.
Yeah. Well,
that shit is hilarious to me.
And to remain competitive in population terms, in terms of population growth, they have to limit immigration.
Yeah. So. Because they can't outfuck other countries.
Well, isn't that because it's so expensive to have kids in this country?
I mean, that's their fault.
Yeah.
That's their fault. And what I've realized is, like, we have an economy that forces us to work for other people's parents so we can spend time with our own parents. When if it enabled our parents to work for them in the first place, our families would be even tighter as units. But it's also like reframing it as if going to work for other people's parents somehow makes us better Americans. So it's this whole big lie about trying to actually trying to reinforce the family unit, but it actually gives us less time to spend with our actual families in the process. That's why we have fucking childcare. Childcare shouldn't be a thing. If the American economy enabled parents to actually care for their kids, we wouldn't need fucking childcare as a service, as an industry. There wouldn't be an industry.
I've read numerous times about this mythological city on the hill where a 40-hour work week provided a single income that was sufficient to purchase a home and take care of a wife and child.
Yep.
And have a dog and a picket fence and a vehicle.
Guess what? Most of the fucking industry was nationalized. Or not national. I don't mean in the sense of owned by government. I mean local and subsidized by government. So they didn't own it, but they would subsidize it, which is why we still have farm subsidies to this day. So there's this element of like all of the shit that happened with the New Deal and the government supporting industry is now labeled as socialism, and those people who benefited from it and still own their houses and don't want to like bequeath their fortunes to their kids, which aren't really fortunes relative to real fortunes. It's just,
I think it's called an estate.
Earning their estates are so large relative to what kids are able to earn today that they are actual fortunes. So like if somebody has like $200,000, somebody who's working today might be getting like $11,000 a year for like full-time work. So $200,000 could support them for like fucking almost 20 years if they just lived at the same rate as if they were living off what they had.
That's a very dystopian world you just projected there.
I mean, what's one we're living in though?
I know. And yes, that's a.
But that's also why the kids say, "Okay, boomer."
It's Kafka, but it's not gray. It's everything still at the same, like.
But guess what? Coronavirus is going to stop all that shit, because then the robots are going to have to come in. We're going to have to switch over to the robots, and then all these people who have their 401ks and don't want them destroyed are going to say, "Well, I want to get income from the robots too," and that's how socialism starts. So, silver linings. I'm all good.
Look, if they can just give us our like flying cars and stepping discs and I just in tricorders they can scan things and tell us information about stuff more than our phones already do, and not like some AR type thing, but like an actual like, hey, this is what this thing's magnetic field is, or oh look, this rock is made of this, or composed of these minerals.
It's not far off, man.
It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Eventually, we'll get to that place where people can all just create, just make something.
I mean, there's always the cipher that doesn't want to get unplugged from the matrix too, and
I'm being really liberal when I say create. I think that can be anything.
Right? No. But I mean,
like that. If someone wants to just work out all the time,
you're a creative person. And assume the best for everybody. And then there's people out there who've never been given the capacity to believe in themselves. And they'll never, ever be a creative person. And that's okay. And that's the cipher, which is why, again, it's like, on the one hand, it sucks to think about that person existing. But that's because you don't want to be that person. So to them, that existence is awesome. They don't want the real steak. They want the fake steak. And that's a valid existence too. So it's weird to empathize with the person who wants to limit their view, but when you do, it actually isn't that sad, because they don't want to have the same awesome experience as you.
I'm not even sure if it's an awesome experience.
It is relative to them. But this is what I've learned is when people experience joy, it's just a natural byproduct of joy to want to spread that joy. So when it's like, oh, I had this fucking steak, you got to try it. Go to Bazbo or whatever restaurant and like get this steak, Little Zagreb's, because they do this,
they've got the sauce.
And then somebody goes and is like, oh, it's okay, because that person doesn't have the same taste buds. But it wasn't that person who wanted to communicate the joy just couldn't for a second realize that it's their exact line of experiences that brought them to that steak that had them enjoy that for that second. And somebody else may not have that same shit. They may have had a better steak somewhere else already. And then you're telling somebody some shit that's not going to work for them. And it's like, it's hard to come to that realization. But I think once you're able to put yourself in other people's shoes better, to understand where they are, then it's a lot easier to not feel bad for them for not having your same experience.
I mean, I don't really feel bad for somebody who would.
I mean, not you personally.
But when I say that people will be freed to do other things, like be creative, I think I think of it in terms of like people have more autonomy to explore the things that they've always been interested in a way that they haven't been before, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to create something. It just means
but some people don't want to do that. Is what I'm getting at.
Some people might want to just sit around and watch TV.
Yeah,
that might be all they want to do.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with that if they just want to consume media and be well versed in the intricacies of some plot line of some season of insert show here. But insert show here has a complex team that develops it, and we know that they put a lot of effort into it, and so they've got an audience.
And at the same time, when you're describing it to me, it's like they are the person commissioning the Michelangelo to be painted. They aren't the person painting it, but they're saying, "Hey, I want a masterpiece. Paint me a fucking masterpiece."
Yeah, tell me a really good
story. So they are a necessary element in the creation process. And that's kind of, again, why I think there's this element of...
Maybe it's more of a continuum.
It is. There's this element of, like, what is a creation without an audience? And if an audience is part of the creation, are they the audience?
So can you actually create something if there's no audience for it?
That's what the happenings tested the boundary for in the 60s. And this is where the performance art and creation of... If you create a performance piece that cannot be recorded to be experienced and the audience has to participate in it, was it art or was it an experience or was it both? And can it be art if people then cannot experience it again because it was only one time. That's why they're called happenings. So there's this whole element of like philosophical approach to art and art. What's the word? Art exhibitions and performance art that was happening and being birthed during the 60s, I guess even 50s and 60s, that was informing, like, so like Yoko Ono is one major happening artist that people know of that probably don't know of her making happenings. So it's like, because we can't go look at her happenings or re-experience them, they're gone. So her creation of them is like lost on an entire generation that wasn't alive, which also demonstrates the beauty. It's like a mandala of modern time.
The only thing I ever see anyone share of hers is something like one of her screaming tracks.
Right. Because that's the only, there's a lot of people who then don't understand the temporary nature of the happenings and the creation of art for the sake of art, which is actually temporary, in contrast to art for the sake of consumption, which is meant to be permanent, which is being represented in the happenings. That's a philosophical debate that has been lost because of art collecting, that then conflates why something is valuable, because this whole debate has been lost, like, because we then can't go back and look at all the happenings and analyze them and what they were trying to say. A lot of those philosophies have been lost and aren't really being understood, even though they're taught in academic institutions. It's nearly impossible to understand them unless you experience it by definition. So that's kind of where, again, all of the understanding of the debate that happened about what makes art was lost once those happenings were gone.
It's really just more of like a, it's just a, what do they call them? A survey. It's like a survey of history at that point, because it's unlike the conservatory where they teach you how to recreate music from some period, like the Romantic period, and you get to study Chopin relentlessly, and they can produce pianists who can play just like Chopin. That's not happening, is what you're saying.
Right. No, that's not happening. More of a happening would be a rave where the musicians are playing intuitively,
where the PA catches on fire and the building collapses at the end of the night. But
No. This has nothing to do with that. In the sense of they're not using records. All of the music that's being created is being made up on the spot, and then there would be shit like people spinning fire or like people painting or shit like that, where these things have happened in some capacity, but not with the intent of capturing chaos incarnate, and then to not have people, then people wouldn't be able to record it.
I've been to some drum circles that didn't work.
Check it though. Another element would have to be that nobody recorded it, because that breaks the happening.
So it has to be, okay.
It can't be recorded.
It can't be reproduced in any way.
No, in no way can it be reproduced. Otherwise, you break the happening. And this is why...
I feel like that's why people probably take drugs at this point, so that they can have a unique and individualized experience.
Very much so.
So you can have an individualized experience with 20,000 other people at a festival.
Which is also why the Beatles were taking LSD, and this is the disconnect between why the Beatles were taking LSD versus the fact that they were just taking it and then wrote a song about Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is why people don't understand what the happenings mean. And what the Beatles were trying to express with their songs about drugs, not just being about drugs, but being about capturing the essence of chaos in the now, in a song that, even though you're going to be able to listen to this song over and over and over, because of different circumstances, every time is different. And they're trying to express that, but then the lack of philosophical open-mindedness, because of, again, the manufactured framework of thought, prevents a certain group of people from even fathoming what they're even talking about, because they're just so wrapped up in Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds in the LSD that they don't understand what the point of taking the drug was to free your mind from the restrictions of the now in the first place.
Isn't that song like mostly like about a girl's birthday? I can't even remember that song.
I mean, it's about a drug trip. I thought. I mean, I haven't looked at the words in a while, but I thought the whole point was that it's supposed to be on the surface about a girl, but when you actually break it down, they're talking about drugs, which is why it's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds as the refrain, but then everything else is supposed to be like a metaphor for the drug trip or some shit. I'd have to go look at the lyrics again, but that's what I always thought was the connotation with the song, was that a bunch of people thought it was about a girl's birthday and only realized later that it was actually about LSD once they realized, like, put together the LSD in the lyrics.
No, I've always been aware of the LSD connection, but...
Well, I'm saying, but you were born after that realization had happened.
Oh, yeah.
So the generation to which that song was released came to that realization roughly in like 79 or 80s or something to make it ubiquitous. And then we're born in like, 82 and 83.
Yeah, 81.
So like by that time the knowledge was ubiquitous, so we're not going to ever have that confusion about it in the sense of the knowledge is already out in the public. In the same way that when you were a kid, I bet you heard that if you played certain records backwards, you'd hear the devil talking or some shit. And like...
Yeah, Ozzy Osbourne. And then in the 90s,
Marilyn Manson.
It was Manson and Metallica
and
all that stuff. It was all devil's music.
Right.
I think that just made me want to listen to it more.
But then you find out that like certain things will happen over time where if you play certain tracks backwards, words will come about just by proxy of the sake of accident. It's the Shakespearean monkey paradox.
Well, of course, the devil speaks English backwards in song form and sounds like electric guitars. That's what the devil sounds like. Right. Satan obviously sounds like just reversed, distorted guitars and drums, and a howling man in reverse.
All these people who think his name is Jesus and not Yeshua, and don't understand Aramaic and think the Bible is written in English.
I mean, that's like interdimensional creatures. They don't speak English, but of course ghosts speak English. Anyways,
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5 RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.